in the early 1990s, lecture theatres and teaching spaces were not filled with tech, mostly just a blackboard and chalk or whiteboards and markers. And classes weren't recorded. If you didn't show up to class on the day, you had no chance. If you're sick or your children are sick or you have to work to pay the bills, nobody cared, you just had to figure it out. Hi everyone, my name is Jack Wang, and if it's your first time to the channel, we talk about science, education, and how all of this helps you learn skills applicable for any career path. I was recently invited to give an international conference talk in Taiwan. That's very exciting. And they've asked me to speak on a topic that I didn't feel at first qualified to talk about: the last 10 years of university teaching in Australia. Now, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that 10 years is actually not a long enough window to really capture all the reasons that we're facing the issues we're facing today. And that's revolving around online learning and teaching and the student experience. We need to go back further and look at a 20-year period. And I mapped out this 20-year period looking at changes in teaching and learning practices into 7 different phases. We can look at each of these phases purely historically, but I think it's more useful to look at it and find what we can learn from each of the changes that happen in each of the phases from both student and teacher perspectives. Today we're looking at the teacher perspective in this first chapter, focusing on phase 1, if it ain't broke, and phase 2, the tipping point. Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. But is what's new always best? We learn by reflecting on old mistakes, but retracing our steps also reveals hard-won wisdom from previous generations. If you've been a student or worked as a teacher any time in the last 2 or 3 years, you'll be all too aware of how chaotic education has become. It's precisely during these moments of instability that we should look backwards to see how it will inform the future of what happens next. This video focuses on teachers, how all of us have adapted for different teaching approaches and delivery modes, and more importantly, what we can learn from each of the 7 phases of university teaching over the past 2 decades. Phase 1, if it ain't broke, from 1990, but really much earlier than that, to early 2000. The lecture is the oldest tradition of university teaching that has stood the test of time. In the early 1990s, classes were just chalk and talk and textbook readings. You had to be extraordinarily prepared as a teacher, walking in with nothing but your knowledge and memory of the order of topics and concepts, and of course chalk and markers. Yes, this was difficult, but most of your work was front-loaded. Once the class finished, that was it. No recording, no summaries, nothing. You rub off what you wrote on the blackboard or whiteboard and everything starts from scratch again next time. Sure, this wasn't that flexible for students who missed a class, but teachers weren't expected to help with that part of the experience. The expectation was that students need to be there to learn, and teachers didn't really have to worry about putting on a good show. And I can see why some teachers think of this as the good old days or the golden age of teaching. But not many students these days can succeed in that type of learning environment. The lesson that teachers can learn from the old chalk and talk days, though, is to be less reliant on audio-visual cues or technology. The idea that we can be compelling just by ourselves, with our words and a bit of our writing, is a very powerful notion. We can all learn to be more effective communicators, and sometimes going back to basics is the best way to learn, even for the most experienced teachers. We can spend our time honing our classroom delivery, how to make the topic interesting through your words and writing, perhaps making one class a week a fully unscripted open dialogue, no slides, no AV, just you talking to your students. Do you have the skills and knowledge to pull this together, to pull this off? That sounds like a really scary proposition, but it's when we're out of our comfort zones that we learn the most. Phase 2, the tipping point. From roughly 2000 to 2005. Starting in the early 2000s, learning management systems like Moodle and Blackboard began to take off. There's now a place for teachers to put stuff online, and the default resource was PowerPoint slides. Everyone started using PowerPoint as the main way of communicating, and there's a lot of advantages for the student. Less frantic note-taking, more focus on what the teacher is saying, and promoting higher order thinking that accompanies genuine learning. But as a teacher, this is a huge time sink. Making PowerPoint slides look pretty takes a long time, and I'm a scientist with no formal training in graphic or visual design. The temptation then is to load each slide full of text, but then you're just reading off the slides. It's a bad experience for both you and your students. Keeping your slides detailed but with room for abstraction and open-ended questions is somewhat of an art form, but in my experience, that's the best balance. Enough information to help guide your students' thinking, but not scripted to an inch of its life and giving your audience death by PowerPoint. I think more imagination is needed. in how teachers can work with learning management systems. Instead of just using it to store PowerPoint slides and worksheets, what about pictures of hand-drawn diagrams, graphics and animations that you've made over the years trying to explain hard concepts in different ways? Small audio snippets of your musings on the topic, or a video of you trying to work out a sample problem, whether you're successful or not. Be more creative and intentional with the multimedia resources we put online for our students is the direction the whole sector is moving in. And as individual teachers, we should be thinking about the skill sets we need to be effective in this space. That was our discussion of the first two phases of university teaching over the past 20 years. And the next chapter in this series will talk about phase 3, the revolution will be televised, and phase 4, MOOCs, MOOCs, MOOCs. If you're interested, the full discussion containing all 7 phases is a much longer video, but it is available on the channel. You can find all the links to the videos below. This is the Biolab Collective. I'm Jack Wayne. See you next time.